Microphone. Am I live?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the beauty of your creation, the opportunity to walk in the footsteps of saints of old and pilgrims of today. As we have this opportunity to share our experience with our brothers and sisters, we ask your blessing upon it. We ask you to touch our hearts and our minds, our souls and our spirits, that we would receive and learn from it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I know Father TJ did this last year about this time, well, a little bit before this time, right? Because last year this time wasn't a good time at all. We did a first Camino 3 years ago, and we were able to do it because we got a grant and we learned some things about it. And this time we went back and we kind of did it on the, with a little bit of brains. We knew where we could save money and what we could do and what we couldn't do, and we knew our limitations and how to better prepare for it. And so it was something to really look forward to this year. I want to start with just a little bit of history, and I'm standing right in front of the slide. Start with just a little bit of history, and we're using notes because we don't have much time, so I'm going to be looking at these a lot to stay on track. We've done this before, and we've talked for 2 hours and even longer, so we're trying to keep it to 30 minutes or so. St. James. There's several of them in the Bible. There's James, the brother of Jesus, and then there's James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee. That's the James that's associated with the Camino de Santiago. James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee. Tradition holds that James, after Jesus' death, went on a missionary trip, and he ended up in Spain. Then he went back to Jerusalem. This is tradition. This isn't historical fact written down someplace, but this is tradition. And it was when he went back to Jerusalem that he was martyred. I believe he was beheaded. And his disciples, because all the disciples went on to be teachers, and people kind of flocked to them and learned from them and followed them, and the disciples went around building churches, not physically, but spiritually. They won people to follow and become believers in Jesus. And so his followers, after James was dead, tradition holds, they put him in a boat, and they brought him from way over here in Jerusalem, all the way around Spain to the coast, where they disembarked him and brought him into some place in Spain and buried him. And then it became lost over the years and the decades and the centuries. And then in the middle of, I forget which century it was, it might have been the 700s or 900s, I can't remember which, I'm sorry. A young lad found his grave and went to his bishop and told the bishop about it. And the bishop found cause to believe that the young boy who found the grave was telling the truth, that it was in fact the burial place of St. James, and it was in the middle of a field. And in this part of Spain, of course, especially that time of history, it was extremely dark at night. And the Milky Way was so bright. And the stars just boomed, beckoned with the brightness that they had. And so, literally, they found James, the remains of St. James, in the field underneath the stars. Now, why am I going through the detail of this? Well, Santiago is the Spanish way of saying St. James. Santiago, St. James. Santiago de Compostela. Campo is field. Stella is stars. So it's Santiago de Compostela, which is Santiago, the place where they found St. James, and in the field under the stars. So there's meaning to this, how Santiago de Compostela got its name. There are many routes. As you can see, all these little red lines, which aren't really in focus, at least I don't think they are, I hope they're not. All those show different pilgrim paths from around Europe. You can go all the way up to the North Sea and all the way down to the Adriatic Sea, and there's lines up in the islands. There's lines of paths of pilgrimages. And you can see one place where many of them converge, wherever it went, is up here. What the dickens? I can't keep up. I think this is Sue's way of saying I need to speed along. They come together in a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is just in the Pyrenees on the French side of the border between France and Spain. And that becomes one of the main routes. It's called the Camino de Francais. That's one of the routes. Then there's the northern route, which is up by the water. There's a Portuguese route that comes along this coast. There's a southern route that comes from somewhere, or comes over here through Europe and connects. It's actually connected there.
The other side.
And then there is the route from Madrid. Those are kind of like the 4 or 5 major routes that converge and meet finally at Santiago. But you can see it's not just a simple walk. This is the converging point, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and this is the route that we walked.
And about 75% of the people who do the Camino are walking the Camino Frances, the one that we did.
Delete your microphone.
Oh, sorry.
So, okay, you can go on with what. Am I talking about that, or are you talking about that?
You can.
You can see, this is how many people finished the Camino and went to the place at the cathedral to get this special piece of paper that says, you really did it. And they check. I didn't pass those around. Did you pass them around?
No. I was waiting for you to talk about it.
Well, we'll talk about it right now. These are called credentials. Compostela. And inside of it are these little squares. And every time you stop, well, you can't really see it there. Every time you stop, you get a stamp at the place that you're stopping, and that proves that you walked from point A to point B that day. And when you get done and you go to get your Compostela, which is the official paperwork that says that you finished, they look at this, and they look at it very closely to make sure that you didn't just get on a car and go around and get stamps to come in and say you walked it. They put an official seal on, which is right here, that says you finished the Camino de Santiago, and you get credit for walking the Camino de Santiago. Whatever credit means. So we're going to just pass this around. You can look at it.
So you can get those stamps all sorts of different places. So generally you get stamped when you check into whatever place you're spending the night. But cafes and museums and churches all have them. So, there are people that actually bring 2 of those with them on the Camino, and they will fill, and get just as many stamps as they can. We were sometimes forgetful, so sometimes we only had the 1 stamp each day.
So, in 1985, they had 2,500 who officially got those stamps and got credit for walking it. This has been going on for centuries. St. Francis of Assisi walked this. There's record that John Quincy Adams walked it, but not the right direction. He had problems going to England or to France, and so they shipped the whole shipment there, and he actually walked it backwards, but he was able to walk it backwards because of all the infrastructure that was built back in those days, even for the Camino. So 2,500, and you can see 10 years later, 20,000, so it went up almost tenfold. 10 years later, it went up fivefold. 10 years later, it's gone up threefold from that. Now we're at 2018, 327,000 people walked the Camino. Not just this route, not just the Camino Francais, but all of these. And they ended up in Santiago with their credentials, and they said, okay, you officially completed the Camino.
So that's not going to include everybody that's walking, because there are a lot of people who, go like 2 weeks at a time, or they do bits and spurts of the Camino, and so they're not checking in at Santiago. So there are potentially a lot more people that are on the trail in that particular year that are not going to show up on those numbers.
Right.
And keep in mind that that's 2018. That's the last year that we've got completed data. So I'm sure this year will be even more.
And not everybody starts, if they're going to walk to Francais, not everybody starts way over here in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to get official credit to walk the Camino. You only have to do the last 100 kilometers, 60 miles, which starts at a point much closer, obviously, to Santiago. The point of that being, it's not like there's 327,000 people out on the Camino all at once. You divide it up over the year, then you divide it up by the different paths that they can walk, and then you divide it up by the number of days that they're actually walking. And it's kind of fun to watch the ebb and flow. Sometimes, some days it's really crowded, like you always see people walking, and other days it's like, where did everybody go? Did we miss a turn? Did we do something wrong? To give you an idea of just how crazy things got, 327,000 people in 2018, the month that we finished our Camino in June or July, I can't remember which month this was for, 40 some odd thousand people finished the Camino. Over 1,000 people a day walked into Santiago with their credentials saying that they had completed it. Okay.
And you've got just a few statistics about who's doing it. I think this year was the first year, wasn't it, that women outnumbered the men?
2018.
Yeah, in 2018. And notice that the bulk of the people are between 30 and 60 years old. The first year that we did this, we met a man who was over 80 doing the Camino. And we met him on the first day that we were walking, and that was the foothills of the Pyrenees, and he put us to shame.
He passed us going up. You want me to talk to him? This is the chapel that's in Roncesvalles, which is the first real stop after Saint Jean Pied de Port. This is the Pilgrim's Mass. So all the people that are walking from that direction, they'll go to this Mass, and it's a Roman Catholic Mass. But at the end, there's a prayer and a blessing that's given for all those who are walking the Camino. And it's kind of neat because you walk into that place and you're a priest and you're a husband and you're a father and you're a wife and so on, and you may be a plumber, you may be a whatever. You walk in there with, because one of the first things you ask them, well, what do you do for a living? Or what did you used to do? Or, that's what you walk in with, and when you walk out, you're a pilgrim. And you may ask somebody where they're from, but you never really get into what they did. We found out one of the ladies we walked with on our first Camino, we kept meeting back and forth, she was a Canadian Mountie. But we didn't know that because we didn't care about it. It was that we were pilgrims and we were sharing this pilgrimage together.
So we wanted to share with you reasons why we did the Camino. And now the slides will auto-play and it won't matter quite so much.
Look at the terrain we're walking on.
The first reason to do the Camino, we thought being surrounded by nature a lot. You have one thing to do. You get up every day and you walk. For us, it was about 15 miles a day. The first day we decided, because we're just crazy, that we were going to do 20 miles because there was a particular place that we wanted to stay. And it was worth the walk, but it ended up making us quite sore. As you'll see in the pictures, there's all sorts of terrain. You're walking on footpaths, sometimes brick cobblestone, lots of hills, even just like little farm trails or farm roads that the farmers are on. Yes?
How is the path delineated?
We'll get to that in just a minute. Yeah. Eric, you want to talk about the three?
Okay, Camino, when you walk Camino de Francais, it's kind of divided into three sections. You got the first section when you're leaving Saint Jean Pied de Port, and it's, just estimated, it's about a third of the distance. So you're in the Pyrenees, you're walking out of the Pyrenees, and you see the grapevines and the beautiful hills and mountains and all those things. And then the second part is called the Meseta. It's kind of the high plains. It's flat and it's boring.
Like that.
No more mountains, nothing like that. I mean, it's
right.
You see the great things there.
When you see the wheat fields, that's the Meseta.
That village is about a mile away from where we're standing right, that picture. So at any rate, the second part is the Meseta. And it's flat, and it's boring, and you're alone. And a lot of people skip the Meseta because it's flat, and it's boring, and you're alone. Which means there's a lot of stuff going on up here. And then the third part, you're walking through, it's pronounced Galicia, it's spelled Galatia, but it's pronounced Galicia, and that brings you into Santiago, and you're going through more mountains on that part. So you have the beauty of the mountains, which is physically challenging. You haven't walked anything yet. You may have trained, but not for the Pyrenees, unless you're an 85-year-old man from France who walks the mountains every day and can pass younger people. But for us, we weren't in bad shape. We could walk a distance, but not with a 15, 20-pound backpack, and not with the mountains. And so your body is getting beat up. You're walking, your feet are getting beat up, your knees, your muscles, your back, all these different parts of your body. It's physically demanding. And then it goes from physically demanding to mentally demanding. Because you get into the Meseta and your mind starts clicking and it starts working. And this is where I want to say that God really starts working on you in a spiritual sense. That's where it's, why am I here? What am I doing this for? This isn't fun anymore. You know, the beauty of the mountains is gone. This is flat, this is long, this is boring. There's nobody around, and you're alone basically with God. I mean, yes, we walked together, but we didn't walk together. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And then you get to the Galatia, and that's where the spiritual part starts to take place. So you've been challenged physically, you've been challenged mentally, and now the spiritual portion begins to take place because you're looking at completing the walk, and you're dealing with the question of, why am I here? What am I going to do when I leave? How am I going to get back into be with people again? Things are beginning to change in your mind and in your spirit and soul.
So we didn't hear that saying until we got back from our first trip, you know, that the first third is for your body, the second part is for your mind, the third part is for your soul. But looking back, we really kind of saw that evidence. And it's really, like Eric said, the Meseta, people skip that, and we would definitely encourage people not to, because it's amazing when you're just out there walking and you're, you know, all you've got for entertainment is your head. Things come up, you know, you're just thinking about whatever your mind brings to you, or maybe whatever the Spirit brings to you. And you just kind of get to deal with that, whereas in your day-to-day life, you just shove that away and you don't really deal with it. One of the hard lessons of the Camino, that in terms of what's working on your body, is taking care of your feet. We walked in good boots that were roomy, 2 pairs of socks, and we used walking sticks, and we learned to stop and rest a lot and take off your shoes. Because as you're walking, you know, 3 hours at a whack before you stop to rest, your feet swell. And if you get your feet out of the boots and then you relace them, then, you know, you're ready to go again. Because if you don't, blisters and foot and knee and hip issues become a thing.
But we're stopping at cafes many times when we do this. Think if you stop at the local Starbucks up in Wilmington and just take your shoe off and start airing out your feet. But everybody does it. It's expected. It's the norm. It's what takes place. The new people learn from the veterans that this is, you better take your shoes off and let your feet air out and the socks dry, or you're going to get blisters, because wet socks mean blisters. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, and generally outdoor cafes. We weren't going into restaurants and taking off our shoes either.
Well,
yeah.
we had outside tables and chairs.
Yeah. We also walked in a variety of weather. The wonderful thing about Spain is the cool mornings. And then the hard part is, you know, the heat of the day. So we always got up early. We were generally starting at about 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, and walking, you know, generally, maybe 5 hours total. So, you know, we would get in before the intense heat of the day. This time. But we met a lot of people that walked until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon or longer. And we decided we weren't doing that. That chews up your feet. The next reason that we decided to walk the Camino was to find our way. And Eric, this one is yours.
So one of the symbols of a pilgrim is a shell like this. And people who are walking the pilgrimage typically have it on their backpack. Some of them wear it like a necklace and it's hanging around. You can still see the string where I cut mine because it was on the back of my backpack the whole time. This shell actually came from the beach on Oak Island. We found it. And so I carried this one with me. But if you don't have a shell, they have shells there that you can obtain. Typically, I guess legend has it, tradition has it, that someone needs to give you your shell that you take with you to walk the Camino. And I thought, well, God must have given me this one because I found it on the beach, so I took it. In history, the shell was proof that, well, was proof that you walked somewhere from over here in Europe, and you made it all the way across to Santiago, and then you went a little further to another town called Finisterre, we'll talk about I think later. And when you got to the shore, you picked one of these up as proof that you walked the Camino and you completed it. So tradition over the years kind of reversed itself. Originally you'd get this when you finished, and then it became people who walked it and came back would hand it off to the next person who was going and they'd carry it with them. This is kind of a cue, well-known cue or clue to the locals, to the natives. They know, oh, you're one of those. And they take care of you. It's not like you're a tourist. You are a pilgrim. And it's amazing what they will do for you because you're carrying one of these things on your backpack. They'll go out of their way to help you. They're as kind as can be. They have joy in doing what they do. I mean, how would you like to work in a cafe where people do nothing but come and take their shoes off and rub their feet and you're making them coffee all day? There's people who do it with joy, all because you're a pilgrim. But there's also significance to the shell, not just because it's proof that you walk the Camino or proof that you're walking the Camino, but when you look at the shell, there's all these grooves, all these lines. Notice that there's many lines on the shell. And notice how they all converge at the same point right here at the bottom. Similar to that map that we had up here. Remember all those different lines, all those different paths that we're walking from throughout Europe. And they got smaller, so they kept connecting and kept connecting and kept. And finally, when they got to Santiago, they all merged at one place. So really, nobody walks the same Camino with each other. You all walk your own Camino. You all are on your own line. And yet, even though you're walking your own Camino, you never walk it alone. There's the history of the saints that walked before you. There's the future of those who walk after you. And then there's those who are walking right next to you. And so the shell is very significant. It holds many different signs and symbols. What else did I want to say about this?
Okay, I'm going to cut you off there.
Okay.
Because we want to show you, to answer your question about how do you find your way. As we're going through this little section, we'll get it going. You'll see all different arrows, shells, different markers. They're everywhere, and you're constantly looking for yellow arrows or shells. And they're everywhere. Buildings, rocks. It's quite fun but you can get in your head and forget that you're looking for those and have to backtrack. But the way is very well marked.
As long as you're looking.
As long as you're looking.
If you get busy talking or you get up into your mind and all of a sudden, did we miss a turn?
And see, there's your little confirmation. Sometimes it's just a pile of rocks.
Or painted on a rock.
But getting up in the early morning, before the sun rises, and trying to find all of those little arrows can sometimes be a challenge. The next topic, I'm going to go ahead because we're crunched for time. The next reason that we walk the Camino is for the fellowship. As you saw in the first picture, and I think you'll see later on here, we walked with our daughter and son-in-law and with Deacon Dale, who was the minister that did the sermon for Eric's installation. So we kind of had a ready-made family. But you also just immediately meet other people. This is the very first day that we're gathered there. Deacon Dale walked for 2 days before we got there, and so he had already made friends that he was just introducing us to. And we passed them for 4 or 5 days. And then we bust ahead because we had limited time. And then you connect with another group of people because you're passing them throughout the day for several days in a row. And if you're walking every day, then you can, be with the same group of people the whole way through. We found it very interesting how many people told us we're walking alone, but they weren't. In fact, I don't know that we met anybody that was just really walking in isolation. You get there by yourself, but then you immediately make friends, and these people would make their rooms, get everything ready, and they would plan ahead, and they would meet at certain places, you know, the next town or whatever, they stayed together. Even though they were walking the Camino alone, they weren't alone at all. Was there anything else you wanted to say about
No,
that,
it's
Eric?
okay.
The next reason we walked was to stretch ourselves, and I had to stop this so that you could see.
This is a vending machine
Oh, wrong
that
way.
you're going to see in just a second. And
Yeah.
look what's in it.
So you probably can't tell this. This is a thing called Compeed. It's bandages for your feet. I'm going to go back to that. Things that are, you know, like icy hot sort of stuff. It's aspirin. I mean, just everything that you can think of. That was not the only vending machine that we saw like that. And what a great idea. Somebody's making a lot of money. The pharmacias in Spain along the Camino do a great booming business. And Compeed owes its existence, I think, to the Camino. Notice, this is hard to see, but tape around the knees, athletic tape. Going up hills is hard on the lungs. Going down hills is incredibly hard on the feet. That slide before was a 12% up ascent, an 18% descent that we did. So physically stretching ourselves, I'm tending my daughter's blister. That's what that's about.
And you can see we're having coffee there. There's the shoes off, and everybody's taking care of stuff.
Bridges and walkways for some of us are a challenge. Having a place to stay. What you're seeing there was a hostel room. Oh, no, let me go back. This was in an albergue, which are, if you know about youth hostels in Europe, these are similar, except they're for pilgrims. So you have to have that little passport, and you know, be carrying your backpack in order to stay in these places. And it's just bunks of beds. We paid a little extra, had a room to ourselves, but still, I think there were 6 bunks in that private room. We stayed in everything from hostels, hotels, a couple of private albergues. If you want to do the Camino inexpensively, then there are the albergues that are just the big rooms of bunk beds. They might be like a donation, so not actually required to pay, or they might be 5, 7, 10 euros a night. So, you know, a really good deal if that's the way you want to do it.
But you're going to share a bathroom with 50 of your closest friends.
And snoring is a real thing. Yeah. And air conditioning by and large is not a real thing, nor fans.
It's cool or not?
Most of the time. We did get into, he said it's cool at night, and he's mostly right, but there were a couple of nights where there was no air circulating, and it was hot.
It was hot in the Meseta.
Our next reason is to experience different cultures, and this is the Breakfast of Champions, Cafe con Leche, tortilla de patate, which is almost a quiche sort of thing. To experience different foods, that was octopus there. Their steak is really good. We got to see a lot of different churches, a lot of, you're bumping into people from all different cultures. And not everybody is walking this Camino for religious reasons. And to me, it's amazing how many people from Asia are walking the Camino.
I'm hoping there's a picture of Robin.
There is. Eric has a favorite church. I mean, you'll see.
That's not it.
No, that's a castle built by Gaudí, if his name means anything to you.
That's the Cathedral in Santiago,
So
which is huge, ornate, incredible.
But the favorite church
if it comes up
It
at
will.
some time.
The sad thing is a lot of the churches are not open now. You know, they're not, and I don't know how many people actually worship in
Okay,
the
this is
churches.
Ravenel, and
Okay, I'm gonna go back. There it is.
so you could probably fit 50 people in that. And there's the monks of Ravenel. There's probably 4 or 5 of them, maybe 6. Every night they do evensong, or they call it vespers, and then compline. And this, you can see that this is not prefab or anything. It's falling apart.
It's peeling plaster.
Keeping it together. I don't know how old the little chapel is, but this was where I was. The first time I did the Camino, I was sitting there and everything's in Spanish, and they're praying in Spanish, and they're doing everything and chanting in Spanish. The chanting's gorgeous in there. And then all of a sudden, the old monk got up and he started to talk, and I'm expecting Spanish, and he said, "Why are you here?" And boy, it was like God spoke. I'm used to Spanish and just kind of tuned out and going on. All of a sudden, just a whole, without any accent, "Why are you here?" And that was, I really took that to heart. Why am I here? And so, this place has a very special meaning to me, compared to the ornateness and the theatrical climax of Santiago and many of the other cathedrals that you pass and go through and visit. That little chapel in the middle of nowhere is a very powerful spiritual place.
And I don't know whether I missed whether Eric said this or not, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but the monks there did Gregorian chant. And so we went for evensong and then for compline, right?
Yeah.
For them to, and I think that's one of the reasons why that one stood out more than the others, because there was just quite a spirit there of God's presence. Am I going backwards? This is one of the cowboy bar. It's famous on the Camino. This is a place that you're out in the middle of nowhere. I want to stop this one too. When we walked into Burgos that day, they were doing an art show, and people were all over the city set up with their canvases, and they were painting throughout the city. There was artwork everywhere all day, and it was just really cool to stand over the shoulder of people and watch them work and create their pieces. And like I say, it was all over. There were just all of them, bunches of them. This was a parade celebrating something.
Fiesta is big in Spain.
Spain loves to party. They know how to do it well. Many places at night, in their culture, they generally don't eat until like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And then, I want to go back to that. And so they're just getting going when we're trying to go to sleep.
They're still going when we get up to leave.
And some of them are still partying when we're up at 5:30 in the morning trying to walk out the door, and that's great. But we'd been in a couple of big cities, and it had been loud at night. I mean, just partying going on the whole night. And we were on our way to a place that wasn't, just, a very small place. We're like, we'll get a good night's sleep here. The place that we stayed was right across the street from the church, and they had a funeral. And then they partied. Yeah. So, I want to show you the next 3 slides. These are wall murals. This is on the side of a building. And they're just awesome pieces of art. That shell looks like some of the way markers and along the route, but this is a painting. And in the picture, it looks almost 3D, right? But that's just a painting on the side of a building. So again, to experience the different culture. Just to see a little bit different and experience life in somebody else's culture. We think that's pretty awesome. And then our last reason that you'll see coming up in just a minute was to recover and process. We ended up going to a place called Muxia, which is at the end of the known world. This is what it looks like. That's two different pictures. For me, this was what I call my thin space. I could feel God's presence in this place, and we loved just sitting out on the rocks and journaling and going back to the little apartment that we had rented and just kind of reliving what we had gone through, just kind of processing the whole experience. This mile marker says 0.0000. That's the end of the known world.
Speaking of the end of the known world, Mushia is up here, and right here actually, and I don't know if you can see that, everybody on the map. It's way over here, just above the 36. And then there's another town that's a little bit below it at number 38, and that's called Finisterre, and which really means the end of the world. Finis, terra, end, land, end of the world. And that was a very important place back in the Roman days in pagan worship. That was the most westward known place you could go to in the continent. And so it was deemed very special, very sacred. So Finisterre, end of the world.
So I'll end with one of the questions that comes up a lot. It actually came up quite a bit when we went through the first time, was did the Camino change us? And I'll answer it this way. When I was a school counselor, I met a little girl, and she came in to the office one day, and she was very upset. I'm like, what's wrong? And she said, today is my birthday. I turned 6, and I don't feel any different. I'm not any taller, and I'm not any smarter, and I just don't see any difference. That's the answer to whether or not you change on the Camino. Yeah, it changes you, but you don't know it right away. You find out later, what you're prepared to do, right? We also realized that it was about finding God in laughter and fun, fellowship, good food, good wine, sore muscles, being out in nature. There is something about being outside for long periods of time where all you have to do is walk. It's good for the mind, it's good for the body. And so we just really, I think, experienced God through the process.
Questions?
What was the altitude when you were in the Pyrenees?
We were at probably about 5,000 feet in the Pyrenees, and we were at 6,000 feet later on in Galicia, right before we got into Galicia, which was where the Iron Cross was, but we don't have time to explain.
Yeah, so there's one more set of mountains that are where we're actually...
The Meseta is at about 3,000 feet, which is still high, but hot and flat and boring. Another question?
Did it rain at all?
We did get a little bit of rain. We were very fortunate not to have, heavy downpours. But we carried our rain gear in our backpacks, And actually, it was so hot when it rained that, you put on your rain jacket. It's like here when it rains, right? You put on your rain jacket and you're coated with sweat. You're wetter on the inside from wearing your raincoat than if you hadn't worn it. It was very similar there.
A friend walked in and came back with the concept of second breakfast. Did you experience
Oh gosh, second and third. We'd get our first breakfast probably about an hour into our walk, and then probably 2 hours later we'd have second breakfast. Because, you're walking, you're putting in miles. 2 hours of walking, I don't know how many miles that is, but you're walking 15 miles a day, and then we wouldn't eat lunch until we got to where we were going typically. So you'd have 2 breakfasts along the way and maybe a snack too. Yeah, I didn't lose any weight.
Me either.
What was your training routine? Did you do so many miles a day before you went, or did you have a particular training schedule?
Everybody's different. First time I went, when I was training, I was actually training to run a half marathon, and then I developed plantar fasciitis, and I didn't do anything because then the winter came in Green Bay, and you can't go running or walking most of the time. So I really didn't get to recover or prepare. I was just fortunate.
Prior to the plantar fasciitis, we had done some 10-mile
Yeah.
walks. But Green Bay is a little bit like Southport. It's a little flat. And so that's, you can build up the strength in your legs, but your lungs are not ready for the,
Well,
for the ascent.
my legs were so fatigued on the first day when we walked those 19 miles out of the Pyrenees to that special place we wanted to stay. I sat down on the stairs while Sue was getting us registered, and the guy who owned the place was a real chatterbox.
He was hilarious.
He had great stories to tell and a lot of personality to tell them. And when it came time to get up, I couldn't. So Dylan, my son-in-law, and Sue each grabbed an arm and lifted me up, and I immediately fell to the next stair. The only way I could get up was to roll around and use my hands to kind of push myself up. My legs were so tired, there was no more strength in them.
And then we had to climb like 2 flights of stairs to get to our room. And
And going up wasn't as bad as coming down.
Hard, but down is much harder. Yeah, Peter.
Were you able to use the new technology in the mountains to book a place?
We booked everything before we left. Because you missed the first part of this, but we were learning how many thousands of people were walking the Camino. And because of my eyesight and because of my needs at night, I wanted a bathroom.
He snores bad.
And yeah, they wouldn't let me stay. I would not be a happy camper with everybody. So no, we booked ahead. One of the great things about technology is if you have a smartphone, Google Translator makes all the difference in the world, because the locals really appreciate you trying to speak or interact with them on their language. And sometimes you can really get yourself in trouble because you know how to ask the question, you have no idea how they answered it. So Google Translator really helps.
And if you're not familiar with Google Translate, if you ever go to a foreign country, download it and get the offline dictionary sort of stuff, because what it will do, there are a number of things that it can actually do. One is live translate. So like, if I had something in Spanish, I could hold my camera over this and it would live translate it for you. Or the guy in the taxi is speaking into it, and then Google Translate says it to us in English, and then we can answer back in English and it says it to him in Spanish. It is a gift.
Oh.
And now that you've mentioned Google, does Google also have Google Maps? So it says Pilgrim at 1,000 meters, turn left.
You can. There's some apps out there. It's not Google itself, but there's some apps like Wise Pilgrim that will help you do that sort of thing. But then you've got to be live, digital, and that's going to be expensive. It's going to eat up your battery too.
But the way is marked so well that you really don't need the technology to find your way.
So we only have 5 minutes for more questions. Anybody?
A friend walked that way some trail, and I asked him what his takeaway was, and he said, simplify.
Yes.
Came home, got rid of a lot of electronics, and I'm wondering, now you've done this more than once, and so is your takeaway been a repeat of the first one, or have you?
Ask me in a couple years. I'll find out what my takeaway is for this one. But yes, simplicity is definitely a takeaway. For me, walking, I still walk 3 to 5 miles a day. That's my God time. You know, just walking and praying and.
My takeaway from this one